Hello, and welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for January 24th, 2013. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Welcome, and joining us on the program today, we have a new person, Thomas Chase, joining us, and John Hogoboom. And I guess, Thomas, if you would please, just give us a little introduction, what kind of work you do, and we'll talk a little later about your experience.
My name is Thomas Chase. I work on the mainframe governance team. I mostly produce metrics and things along those lines.
All right, very good. And again, thank you for joining the program. And let's see, let's go, and of course, I'm Brian Rexroad. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the things that we thought we'd share with you today. First thing, I guess, John, you have something that showed up on the Today Show today, and has a few little interesting attributes, right?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of buzz about this one, even around the office here. The NBC website, I guess via the Today Show, had an article a story they're presenting about webcams being hacked. This is not a topic that is particularly new, but maybe they're just putting a fresh face and reminding people about it. So that's why I think it's kind of important to point it out. Basically, the story revolves around bringing an awareness to the fact that malware can be deployed onto your home PC, and that can really open up all the facilities of your computer to an attacker who might have placed something on there. So one of the things people have been doing, and this has been going on for many, many years, but they can activate the web camera that might be attached to your computer and spy on you, and even activate the microphone. A lot of these cameras nowadays have microphones as well, or maybe even separately, and listen in on what's actually happening in the room. So there's a big privacy concern there. A lot of people get panicked, and they actually go through some of that in the story there, kind of illustrating the point with some people who have been compromised in this way. We also had been reporting back in the summertime and spring of last year, not really directly related, but we've seen the DVR web cameras, which is just another big, fancier version of web cameras. It's an appliance, basically, for multiple web cameras. Those have been hacked, and we don't know what the ultimate intent of those were, but those are one of those things that that people are targeting, nowadays. And there's been other stories. There was another story last year as well about a particular vendor, and the name escapes me, but there was a vendor who had a particular web camera out there that was had a back door that was left open, so that if you knew that back door, it was just like on a particular port or something you had to connect to, you could just see what was going on that camera without actually authenticating to it. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of these types of stories out there.
Yeah.
So if you have a camera...
I guess in general, this isn't altogether that different from a lot of the, what are called advanced persistent threats, but a lot of times the objective is to steal information off computers. This just happens to be potentially real-time information. I think the thing that's fundamentally different here is it really brings it to a personal level, that most of the ththings that we've talked about have tended to be focused on protecting businesses, but as our culture has been changing, it used to be, even just 10 years ago, typically there was one computer in the house. It probably didn't have a camera connected to it. It was probably sitting in, an office or something. And now most homes have several internet-connected devices. A lot of them may have cameras associated with them, and right into the bedroom. And so this, I think, is really fundamentally, it gets a lot more personal when you have possibly a webcam coming on and it's in your bedroom, and you get the idea.
Yeah.
Has there been any reports of it being not just spying on an individual, a random person who may have the spyware, but has anyone tried to get it out into like a business and listen in to maybe an executive or someone with a higher profile to get some actual information that would pose more of a threat, rather a privacy issue, but more of an information threat? Has that any reports of that?
Well, there certainly have been cases like that in the past. In fact, there was I think there was an exploit specifically associated with the Cisco telepresence platform. I think we reported perhaps on that maybe back in the summer last year, and that was the concern, is that it could get actually into, telepresence tends to be used for not just your run-of-the-mill daily conferencing, but for more of the executive level teleconferencing activities. So that's an area where certainly you would have a business concern. It could have to do with strategic planning associated with businesses and such. So absolutely, there have been cases, at least theoretically. I don't know if there have been any practical or cases where people have been caught red-handed doing this sort of thing, but it certainly is one of these things that we are concerned about.
So what would be the best practice to protect yourself? I mean, from both you can, if you have an external webcam, you can obviously just unplug that, but you mentioned microphone as well. So what would you recommend just average people do to protect themselves?
Yeah, I think I'll first repeat what they say on the Today Show program. The few things that they said were, first of all, shut off the PC. I guess my caution for that would be that, some PCs can wake on LAN activity, so there is a possibility that even the malware could have programmed into it to get the computer to come back on again. So shutting off certainly is a countermeasure, but not necessarily a complete fix. Second one would be they suggested putting black tape on the camera, which I think, Thomas, as you're pointing out, you can, even better if you can, unplug the webcam, but there is still a possibility of being able to turn on the microphone and at least hear what's going on in the room. So not a complete fix in itself either. And then the third, and probably as good as anything else, is don't open links or documents from people you don't know. That includes emails. They specifically pointed out, links on Facebook from sources that you're not familiar with. I think generally, we've been, preaching a lot of the same protective measures. You have to be very careful about, what you load on the computers, and a lot of the newer operating systems certainly do a better job at alerting you when software is being installed on it, although it doesn't protect you from a rootkit or an exploit that's associated with that. I don't know, John, do you have any other suggestions?
No, I think you covered the major ones there. I think this will be more, I think this kind of story maybe is getting more press nowadays because there are a lot more cameras on PCs as well as laptops. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to buy a laptop that doesn't have an embedded camera in it, whereas 2-3 years ago, that may not have been the case. It was still an optional thing, but nowadays, pretty much everything has one built in. Mm-hmm. And people are moving to more laptop-oriented devices than they are desktop, it seems to me, in general. So there's a lot more availability to exploit that avenue in terms of as a spying tool.
So in that case, you can't necessarily unplug the webcam, but you can certainly close the lid. It makes it a lot harder for the camera to see anything of interest. I guess, one other thing I wanted to point out is that mobile devices aren't impervious to this kind of problem either. I'm not aware of any specific case like this, but it certainly would be the possibility. Most of the new smartphones have cameras built into them, at least one, if not two of them. Certainly tablets are the same situation. So it would be something to be paying attention to. There are probably even more personal environments which these smartphones and such may be present with you, and you need to be paying attention to whether or not those cameras might actually be working. So with that, I thought one last sort of final comment on this. I think it's very encouraging that this type of information is getting more into the mainstream so that people, in their day-to-day lives are paying more attention to what's going on from a computer security perspective. So with that, I'd like to kind of steer us over, and we'll call on Thomas here. I think, Thomas, you had a real-life experience that perhaps not an entirely new one, but I think it's nice to get the perspective of somebody that's actually had the opportunity to experience one of these cases. Can you tell us a little about it?
Yeah. It was actually pretty interesting. I got a phone call at home, and the gentleman on the line indicated that he was an employee of Microsoft and that they were seeing a virus from my computer attacking their Windows servers. Then he stated that he has my information from a database, and they got the information based on my IP address, and they want to basically help me get rid of the virus that's supposedly on my computer. Well, the first question was, to me, okay, I have antivirus, I have all this. Why would Microsoft be specifically calling someone out? And how would you get my name and phone number? I filled up product registration, but it just seems a little bit weird to me. So he kind of did his spiel again. Basically, your computer's attacking the Windows server, and I'm kind of like, the Windows server, you're not really, making a lot of sense. So I said, hey, for my simplicity and for my satisfaction, tell me what my IP address is. I know how to go look up my own, so I pulled it up, and, he basically said, hold on, and he came back with, it was actually pretty funny, I think it was a combination of a driver's license number, an address. It was not an IP. It was like CHX79, yada, yada. I looked it up online, and I Googled it, and it's an old game. They've done it for years. And they actually try to walk you through and show you your task manager and log and show you that, hey, your computer's only using 5% of its CPU usage. Well, that's all you have left, because you have a virus. It only has 5% left. Well, no, you're using 5%. So they try to convince you using some kind of technical practices that they walk you through to get you to a certain point, and whether that be, have you buy an antivirus or go download something, that's different depending on who's calling. But once I questioned them a little bit and I started actually laughing about the IP address he gave me, the line went dead. And I thought it was funny, but a few minutes later, it occurred to me that someone who's not as technical, you hear this company that you know of that's rather large, any company really that has a large profile that people are aware of, some people may accept that.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. And I think, we've talked about sort of example cases in the past where a lot of these scams, this is a little bit different, but even the email scams tend to be targeting sort of the low-hanging fruit, the ones that are going to be easier targets. And that's been at least an explanation in some accounts of the reason that, sometimes the English is not so good, or they make some obvious errors in the spamming emails that go out, sort of the royal prince of Nigeria that's needs you to pay money so that you can help with his inheritance. And so this is, I think, another example like this. And, I guess if we take this in a sort of a more general perspective, the question is, how do you identify scams like this? Perhaps somebody comes up with a little more clever idea. And it is really very similar to sort of the phishing protection type things, is that you want to start asking yourself questions. When somebody starts asking you for information, the immediate response should be to start asking them for information to make sure that it's credible. And it's very similar to making sure that the URLs, the links that are associated with emails, that they go to credible sites. So that's, I guess, the first thing that I would suggest to sort of keep an eye out. And also very helpful in this kind of circumstance, when somebody calls you on the phone, you have to be thinking in real time. You don't get to go back and sort of ponder. And what you want to try to do is turn yourself around into the driver's seat. So rather than having them ask new questions immediately, just ask for some contact information if you're not sure, and tell them that you're going to call them back and help them out. And most likely that's going to put them, at a disadvantage. I don't think you're going to get a callback number for this person, but if you did, at least gives you some time that after you hang up to consider the situation, consider what questions you might want to ask them, do some checking around to see if there are similar scams like that going on, and then go back to see if it really is a valid thing. And, it's not outside of the possibility of having, someone really call you looking for assistance in a security issue. We certainly do this on a regular basis with our customers and are trying to resolve security issues on the Internet. It is sort of a difficult situation for a lot of customers. They have to develop some trust in who's calling them and why they're calling them. So this is an opportunity where, ask for some contact information, have them provide that so you can call them back, and then see if the situation is really real. But certainly, Thomas, I think you had a really good example here. Like you said, it's not new, but one that, when you have the opportunity to experience yourself, sort of provides new light to the situation, right?
Yeah.
Now, I suspect that most of the people that are watching this program or listening to it are probably associated with business enterprises. They're already probably pretty technically savvy about security issues. And I thought it'd be reasonable to take a little bit of a step further to say, this is sort of a conventional scam. It's one that's been around for a while. But what if they took it a little bit further? So, I think perhaps some things to consider is and we've talked a little bit about this before, what sorts of information are out there about you that could allow someone that if they're, say, targeting your business, to craft a scam that would be very compelling or challenging to identify that it is, in fact, a social engineering sort of attack. I don't know if you have any thoughts about this, but are there any of things that you can think of that might make this a little more complicated?
Well, certainly from a business aspect, and we've talked about this before. Now, we're taking a little bit different tangent here, but when you get into some of these advanced persistent threat actors and the state-sponsored type guys who are going after certain individuals, targeted individuals, they'll do a lot of investigation and mining to find out information, data mining, to find out information about people that they're targeting. LinkedIn is a big source, so they'll go to LinkedIn. They'll see, who does this person know? What other companies does he have linked in with his profile and things like that, in order to kind of establish a relation or establish some kind of base of trust. So they might use one of your LinkedIn contacts to source an email into you, pretending they're that person, and you might trust that that's a real email from that person. So, and they'll keep their message on target and whatnot with what your business is. So that's something to that's a kind of more advanced type of technique that people use to target you. I haven't heard of that being used over the phone, but for sure with emails and whatnot, we know that these APT actors will do some research on their targets. If you're someone in a business that they want to target and infect your machine and steal proprietary information or strategic information from your company.
Absolutely. And I think sort of another thing to consider would be that if it's an actor that has a significant amount of motivation, some funding behind them, they're not going to take the one sort of shot approach to things. Keep in mind, they may have talked to colleagues of yours. They may have determined who you work with. They may have called other people, asked them some questions, maybe gotten little tidbits of information, which allows them to build a much stronger social engineering attack against you. So it is important to be very careful about who you're talking to and what information you provide. Again, try to get it the role reversed, where you are initiating the discussion with them and have thought through what makes sense. Let's go ahead and take a look at the internet weather for the week. And the first thing that showed up on the list here is increase in byte activity on source port 161 UDP. We've talked about this sort of activity a number of times before. It is associated with, port 161 UDP is associated with simple network management protocol. I'm showing 30 days of data here, and as you can see, the activity is quite spiky in nature. And usually this activity is associated with SNMP reflection or amplification denial of service attacks. And I looked at a couple of examples here, and it certainly was indicative of that sort of activity. The targets in these attacks vary, as well as some of the techniques that are involved behind the scenes associated with these attacks. So what that basically indicates is that there are multiple actors using this sort of attack. None of these are particularly huge in terms of the size of attack activity, but that's looking at it from a particular perspective. The victim may see it very differently. And in fact, I'm using sort of relative terms. We certainly see larger attacks, but for most Internet users, even these attacks would probably have a significant disruption on their service. And since we're on the topic of denial of service attacks, I thought I'd just take a little bit of a look at just a series of Internet flow anomalies over the past week or so. And that's basically what we're showing, is basically the last 7 days of activity. What this is showing is anomalies in flow activity. 4 specific address blocks. So in this particular graph, we see a number of different colors that are graphed here. Each of those colors represents effectively a target of an attack activity. Usually these are SYN floods, that is, the attacker's just throwing connection requests at the target, has no intention of responding to it. Oftentimes they're spoofing the source addresses associated with these. So the reason I wanted to show this or share this with you is just over the last week or so, you can see that there are literally dozens of these attacks going on. Many of the targets are sort of opportunistic or random. They're even associated with sort of competitive activities or gaming activities that are taking place on the Internet. Others might be even associated with botnet operators that are testing their techniques to see how effective they are or see how effective their bots are as a part of attack activity. These oftentimes are used in, in more sinister types of attacks later on, but certainly there are plenty of denial of service attacks that really don't make the media mainstream. I wanted to at least make sure that you're aware of that. Next set of activity that we see here, this is scan flows on port 10,000 TCP. This is, I think last week I'd reported on this and didn't really have an application that was associated with it. I dug into it a little bit further this time. And there is an application associated with this called Network Data Management Protocol, one that I wasn't particularly familiar with. This is apparently associated with being able to support backup processing with network-attached storage. Rather than go into the specifics of that, I'll just sort of describe the type of activity that we've seen here. This is a case where we're seeing somewhat sporadic, actually more consistently repetitive scanning activity from a single source address in China. The source port of the activity is generally fixed on port 6,000 TCP. This is fairly typical of what we've seen in a lot of scanning activity. I think it's basically a process that's set up to run more efficiently than trying to make individual TCP connections. They're basically throwing the packet out and then having a separate process see if there's a response back from it. And then what we've seen and that we had observed in the report last week is the beginning of what appeared to be some automated scanning pattern activity. And that pattern of activity has continued. That is, each day there seems to be a fairly consistent pattern in terms of the amount of scanning activity that may have something to do with the pattern they're using to randomize the addresses as they do the scanning. So on this graphic here, we're showing a link to a more in-depth description of the Network Data Management Protocol if you're interested in that, and we'll want to keep an eye on what's going on with that port. Next item here, again, we reported on activity associated with this port last week. This is port 5038 TCP. That's the port that's used for asterisk VoIP management, that is voice over IP management. So this is a particular product that provides voice over IP capabilities. Consistent with the last week's report, we're basically seeing one or so addresses that are scanning on this port at any given time, and it's changing over time. So we see, for every little spike of activity that we're seeing here, it may be a different address that's doing that scanning. It appears that, based on the patterns of activity, that they are associated with each other, but changing the address. And one of the addresses that we happen to see here is we're seeing some unusual countries in this case, ones that we typically don't see. Last week we saw one from Cambodia. This one we're seeing from one from I'm going to butcher the name here, Azerbaijan. And I wasn't even familiar with where that country is, so I had to go and look it up, and I'll just go ahead and share a map with you here. It's kind of sandwiched between Iran and the country of Georgia and Turkey here. So Armenia is actually there in the Caspian Sea to the right of it, to the west, the east. So that's a new country for me. Azerbaijan is my producer is helping with my pronunciation here. Thank you very much. So in any case, this is a country that is originating some of that scanning activity. It doesn't necessarily point to any of the specific actors associated with this activity, but certainly a new one that's showed up on the radar from my perspective. The next one is scan probes on port 5631. TCP, and this is a port that's associated with PC Anywhere. So as we frequently report scanning activity, and we'll see it yet again on ports like 3389 that's associated with Remote Desktop Protocol, PC Anywhere was one of the earlier applications associated with remote desktop capability. I assume that it's still a live and well product. And we certainly have seen scanning activity. That is, we're showing 180 days worth of activity on the graph here. You can see that it's very frequently scanned, spiky nevertheless. And it showed up on the radar this week is partly because we're seeing what I would describe as a higher density of scanning activity just in the last week or so. And again, this is way to the right of the graph because we are looking at 180 days of activity. In terms of scanning activity, looking at our pie chart here from yesterday, January 23rd, we're looking at the top 10 most probed ports. And again, no surprises here, the typical ports that we're seeing. First of all, a lot of peer-to-peer activity associated with the zero-access botnet. That's 16434 UDP, 16471 UDP, and 16465 UDP. We obviously are seeing port 445 TCP, a prominent scan port, and then some of the typical ones that we've seen for password guessing attacks, port 23 TCP, 22 TCP, 1433 TCP, and 3389. And those are associated with the Telnet, SSH, MySQL database, and Remote Desktop Protocol, respectively. And then we also reported this last week. There is continuing scanning activity on port 53 UDP. I presume that's scanning looking for open DNS servers that would be usable to support DNS amplification attacks. And last but not least, we have the most sources probing. So this is indicating the number of IP addresses we see scanning on a particular port. And in the majority here is port 445 TCP. We see, again, the peer-to-peer activity associated with the zero-access botnet. And then none others that really stand out. We see a couple of ICMP ports here, port 3389 TCP. One of them, this is actually a type 11 ICMP, which is a good possibility that may be some backscatter associated with some sort of an attack. Okay, well, that's the show for today. I want to thank you, John and Thomas, for joining the program. If you'd like to get in touch with us, and we certainly encourage you to, I guess certainly looking for any ideas that you've come up with for social engineering scams that could be launched, you can contact us through email at threattrak@list.att.com. This video program is available from the AT&T Tech channel at att.com/threattrack, and you can also find it on YouTube and iTunes. I want to thank you for joining us today. Next week, we'll be back with a new episode. We're going to move up our recording session a little early in the week, so we'll hopefully be able to get sessions out to you more quickly in the future. And until then, please keep your network safe.